So I've been talking about third-party Nintendo Switch controllers since the system came out in 2017, and as we've gone along, there have been more and more advancements and more features tacked onto these different controllers that would work to replace the Switch Pro controller, or I guess technically your Joy-Cons in the grip. Well, recently I noticed there was a controller that finally adds in the idea of HD Rumble, the thing that's pretty much separated third-party controllers from Nintendo's official stuff for a long time. In fact, I think this might be the first one that I've seen, and in fact, it goes a step further, as there's actually two different types of Rumble motors in this controller. Yeah, it's probably one of the weirdest ones I've seen so far, but we're going to take a look at it here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and we're going to start today with this video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Factor. Ladies and gentlemen, the holidays are here, which means our schedules are packed, making it hard to plan out meals and stay on top of things when it comes to healthy eating. With Factor, you can cross meal prepping off your list. Instead of spending time at the grocery store in line, simply choose from more than 35 weekly flavor-packed meals that include Calorie Smart, vegan and veggie, protein plus, and other wholesome options. These meals are delivered fresh straight to your door and come together in just 2 minutes. I like to use Factor for lunch since that's usually the busiest time of the day for me, and getting a meal together fast really helps to keep things going without having to stop and figure out what the plan is for food. Oh, and the best part? Cleanup is a breeze. You can also rest assured that you're making a sustainable choice with 100% of delivery emissions being offset, along with their production sites and offices sourcing 100% renewable electricity. This holiday, get Factor and cross off the stress of meal prep from your list today. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code SpawnWave50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. That's Factor75.com or click the link below and use code SpawnWave50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Well, let's start with the unboxing, which on the front we can see is an image of the controller along with Binbok Play and Gemini at the top. If we flip around to the bottom, it does say Born to Game, and then on the back is a front-facing image of the controller along with contact info for Binbok. Really looking around the packaging, there isn't much here, and you're greeted with a plain cardboard box. So don't expect luxury or anything high quality feeling, but after removing the slipcover, we do open it up, and inside we have the controller, instructions, and a USB-C to Type-A cable for charging. With the controller out of the bag, I noticed they did have something similar to a screen protector covering the entire front, and that's because there's a lot of transparent glossy plastic to protect. Look, I'm not a huge fan of glossy plastic on any of my electronics. However, I guess this is probably the least offensive, considering the transparent plastic does tend to hide some of the lighter scratches. Certainly better than the solid color glossy plastic. This also gives us our first look at the dual motor setup on each handle, but more on that later in the video. All of the buttons you would expect to see on the front are there. A, B, X, Y, plus, minus, home, and share buttons, all represented as expected. The main face buttons have a satisfying press to them. In fact, they're pretty close to the official Switch Pro controller. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the D-pad, which appears to use tactile buttons under each directional input. It feels like you put a D-pad on top of the left Joy-Con arrow buttons, and the pivot point in the middle is non-existent. So pressing down and hitting all 4 directions at once is not just possible, it's actually pretty easy to do. I'm not a huge fan of the left and right thumbsticks either. Not that they feel bad in movement, the tension is fine on the sticks. It's the design on the top of each one, so it just doesn't offer much grip at all. This really doesn't need to be a place to overthink things for manufacturers. While I'm sure they want to have a unique design here to stand out, just a simple textured surface around the edge of the stick is going to be better. Even something basic like 4 dots around the stick edge for each direction, kind of like what Microsoft did with the older Xbox controllers, would work fine here. I do want to give Binbok some credit, though, for the shoulder buttons. ZR, ZL, it's all probably the best I've seen on a third-party controller to date. These have the exact same feedback when pressed that the official Pro controller has, and I'm glad they didn't use clicky tactile buttons like I see other controllers attempt to do. You'll notice we have our USB-C input for charging up here, as well as a sync button, which can pair the controller to a Switch wirelessly without having to plug it in first. On the back is where things look way different than any controller so far. So there are 2 macro buttons, which is fairly common now with third-party controllers, But alongside of these, we also have a turbo button, RGB control button, and a switch that lets you go between different rumble motors, depending, I guess, on which one you want to use. Let's start with the RGB control button. On the front, you will notice we have RGB strips on the left and right handles. These can be cycled to include different effects such as breathing or solid colors, along with brightness intensities. Normally, I see RGB lighting on controllers as overdone and unnecessary, but this is at least pulled off in a way where I see it more as a subtle addition. It's sort of like an accent to the front of the controller, and it lets you personalize it a bit. I set it to a nice cool blue and turned the intensity down to the lowest setting, and it looked like a blue glowing strip on either side. This to me is the way to go. Don't blow out your controller with bright lights everywhere. Keep it somewhat restrained, and I feel like you'll end up with a better look. Now, on to the most unique part about this controller, the rumble. This is the first third-party controller that I'm aware of using what Nintendo has marketed as HD Rumble. You can see them through the window on the front, as mentioned earlier, and the switch on the back lets you jump between either rumble type on the fly. It's going to be hard to convey this on camera, but I have an idea to see just how close they came to Nintendo's official controller in this instance. First, though, let's fire up Quake 2, mostly because I want to test out the gyro to make sure that worked, which it does. Also, firing around with different guns does give me my initial experience with the rumble, and it's about what I expect from haptic feedback. Like, if you change between the different guns, they will give you a more distinct rumble. For example, the pistol here that you're seeing will shoot slowly, so the rumble kicks in every second or so, whereas if you have an automatic gun, it's very, very rapid to match the clip. But here's the fun part. See, the way linear resonant actuators work, you can produce sound with the rumble motor, and Nintendo will take advantage of this in different games. One title that came out recently is Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and it, in fact, uses this feature. Also, I can immediately tell you the D-pad is just disgusting when I'm running through these levels, so there's that. Anyway, a quick jump to World 1 with the Piranha Plants dancing. We can run across some blocks here. Each step will produce a sound with the vibration that registers on the controller. It's a fun detail that Nintendo added into a game that already has a huge focus on the small details. So how exactly did the Gemini do? Well, you could take a listen for yourself. Seriously, this is a really, really cool thing in this game, and if you haven't tried it before and this is the first time you're hearing about it, yeah, jump to a level with these different colored blocks at the bottom and hold your Pro Controller, your Joy-Con for the Switch up to your ears, and you'll be pretty impressed. But I'd say that this holds up pretty well for an aftermarket controller. I noticed it's not quite the same pitch as Nintendo's Pro Controller, but this is something that can vary on the linear resonant actuator build. And remember, Nintendo is designing something like this for their specific hardware. The point here is, yes, a third-party controller has seemingly pulled off what Nintendo has coined as HD Rumble. I did move back and forth between the eccentric rotating mass rumble and the linear resonant actuator motor, and I'm not really sure why you would want to use anything other than the LRA motors. They just feel way better. They're more accurate, and they start and stop on a dime compared to a spinning motor. Overall, though, the controller, it's solid. It has some good weight to it. It doesn't feel cheap despite being covered in glossy transparent plastic. That said, while I get the idea of wanting to show off the unique idea of multiple sets of rumble motors, it can come off as a tacky look with the whole front just being transparent plastic. Let's break this controller down now, though, and take a look at really two main things: the motors and the D-pad. We have some Phillips head screws on the back that let us open the controller to a 1000 milliamp hour battery. They say it's good for 10 hours or so of play. I didn't necessarily test in time to see how accurate that is, but hey, at least it's a plug-in connector, so it could be replaced if you can find a compatible one. Hey, knows. Maybe even upgraded. At the bottom of the controller board are plugs for the rumble motors, and unplugging and removing them, we can set them up next to each other so you can see a side-by-side comparison. The LRA motor is the square one that Nintendo has moved to now and is a more accurate method for delivering rumble to a motor. The eccentric motor is what we've been experiencing for a long time now and simply spins in place with an uneven weight to create that rumble sensation. I think it's interesting to have both as a unique feature, but most people who buy this controller probably aren't changing between the two often, and honestly, the LRA motor is what most will go with anyway. Oh, and just for fun, I pulled apart the LRA motor, and inside we can see two magnets that sit on either end of a coil, which should be wrapped around a spring. At least that's my understanding of how it works, where signals can be sent when vibrations are required for an application, and mass can move immediately inside this enclosure. Because it's so fast to start and stop, finer details are possible, and technically the term HD rumble does at least make sense in that regard. It's something that's been used successfully in different phones for a while, like the iPhone haptic feedback for the home button, and I think it's one of the better advancements this generation for game controllers. I'm just not sure why it's taken this long to include HD Rumble in a third-party controller. Maybe the cost involved, or having to source and design the LRA motor itself, but maybe we're close to seeing more controllers with this Rumble type come out. Of course, though, right at the end of the generation. Oh, and the D-pad is exactly what I figured. Underneath the plastic are 4 separate buttons that are the same as the plus and minus buttons on the board. Minimal pivot point and tactile buttons with little travel make this a poor experience for platformers and fighters. This is easily the weakest point of the entire controller, so if you want a good or even average D-pad, I would look elsewhere. But that's going to do it here for the Gemini Switch controller from Binbach. While I think the idea of having multiple rumble motors in there is at least interesting, it's kind of also unnecessary, and really at this point, if they go forward with just the HD rumble motors inside, I think that would be better. It's just a shame that it took this long to get to this point. Otherwise, though, it coming in at the price of $50, you already are getting kind of close to an official Switch Pro controller, so it's really up to you if you want things like the RGB or the different macro buttons on the back, as well as the turbo functionality. If you're fine with that and a well below average D-pad, it's actually not a bad controller to pick up. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Finally seeing HD Rumble make its way into a controller that's not made by Nintendo for the Switch. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.